If you're looking for inspiration in your career or job search, you're at the right place. I have a very special offer for you today. My Career Success Program is packed with over $3,000 worth of career support, and you can try it out for 3 days for only $25. Now, that's an offer you can't refuse. Go to janejacksoncoach.com/academy and check it out. Now, back to your career podcast. Now, my next special guest is Rod Jahner, a dear friend of mine and a risk management professional with global experience in training and executive development. With an MBA in operations research for over 27 years, he's held management positions at Citibank and Standard Chartered Bank in the US, the last 10 years in Singapore, covering Asia, Australia, the Middle East, and Africa. Thousands around the world have attended his training courses on risk management, product management, back office processing, business writing, and trained the trainer. In 2009, Rod transitioned into entrepreneurship and founded Level 4 International, LFI, to improve middle and senior management effectiveness. LFI has developed training for clients in Europe, Asia, and the US. He's a certified personnel consultant, master coach, and certified professional resume writer. Most recently, Rod published his first book, Never Do Anything Just Right, a memoir recalling things global, personal, and, to be frank, sometimes inappropriately funny. Or so at least one reader has said. Now, let's welcome Rod to the show. And let's welcome Rod Jahner to the show. Hello, Rod. How are you?
Jane, I'm terrific. How are you? It's been too long.
It has been ages. And Rod and I knew each other way back when in Singapore. And we were just discussing before we started recording when it was that we last saw each other. And I think it was about 2006 or 2007 in Singapore.
Yeah.
So now we have this fascinating story because Rod's made lots and lots of interesting career changes, country moves, as well as moving into entrepreneurship, and now is the author of this amazing book, Never Do Anything Just Right. Okay, I'm just showing it on the screen for anyone who's actually watching the YouTube version of this podcast. But before we talk about the book and how you became an author, let's kick off with, what were your early aspirations for your career when you were a little boy, right?
You know, I've thought about this, and the earliest one that I can think of is I wanted to be a National Basketball Association player. I wanted to be an NBA power forward. And two things kind of got in the way of that. I ended up being about a foot shorter than all of them and about 80 pounds lighter. And the other thing that happened was I had a decided lack of skill in basketball. So that dream sort of went sideways in a hurry. The question actually reminds me of my oldest son. I asked him one time, well, Kyle, whatever happened to your desire to be either a garbage man or an airplane driver? And he said, I turned 7.
Yeah. You know, I mean, whatever we dream of when we're little, some of us actually become that, and others do something completely different. I have to say, some of my previous podcasts, one of my guests said that he wanted to be Batman. Another one just wanted to be an elephant. So I think an NBA basketball player is a good one, isn't it? And
they had about as much idea of reality as I did for a very long time. And I actually like it's one of my pet peeves, quite frankly. As I went through school, there was really nothing to speak of that taught you how to figure out, I think you call it what makes you tick in your book. Mm-hmm. We didn't have that. You know, we're in an age where getting an education was all you needed and life would just take care of itself. And a good share of us, and I was at the top of the list, had no earthly idea what they wanted to be when they grew up. And that carried into my working life, quite frankly, before things started to gel just through working hard and finding people that would mentor me.
Mm.
So
Yeah, having a
it's my
mentor.
pet peeve to this day.
Yeah, I think having a mentor makes a huge difference, and I found the same too. I mean, back in the day, careers guidance was really non-existent, and any sort of suggestions from teachers at school weren't really that helpful because I felt that they weren't really invested in my future, really, because they just didn't know me well enough. But these days, there is a much stronger focus. But let's go back to your career and how it progressed, because you are now a published author, which is a huge, huge, just a fantastic event, and congratulations. I'm very
Thank
excited
you.
for you. But before we talk about the book, because it's an amazing book, I was given an advanced reader's edition. And so I went through it and I was just chortling and laughing. And these really, this is a memoir, Rod's memoirs, aren't they? And all of the stories. And anyone who knows Rod Jahner will know that when you sit down at a party or at a dinner, there'll be lots of stories. They'll be very funny. And the evening will go on and on and on and on, and they'll be much drunk and a lot of merriment. And so if you're going
Very
to read this
possible.
book, never do anything just right. It's going to be a wild ride. But before that, let's talk about your career, Rod. How did it begin? Because your career has taken you from St. Louis in the US to Singapore to all over the world, and then back to America again, working in corporate as well as being an entrepreneur. So let's hear this brief story. Let's go
Okay.
through the timeline. And when you made each transition, I'd love to know, how did you feel? Were you anxious? Were you excited? Let's just find out how you make career transitions.
Okay. Well, it started sort of unremarkably in North Dakota. I came out of undergraduate with a mathematics degree and a minor in computer science that I didn't have any earthly idea what I was going to do with. I ended up getting a job at social services in North Dakota, in my hometown, Bismarck. And my first mentor became my roommate at the time's dad, who was working for a job service across town. And he got a job for me there, which later on, after a couple of years, had me exposed to the Department of Labor. They were doing a special project in Denver. That's how I ended up there, and asked me to join it. And in exchange, they'd give me an MBA. So it was it was even a hard decision to make, even with as good as the deal was. But I did that, worked on this project with the head of the operations research department and with some people from the Department of Labor. It's talked about in the book. It's got kind of an interesting conclusion. I won't bore you with it now. But after that project was done, there wasn't anything available for me. There was a federal hiring freeze in government. So I took my free MBA and went off the private sector and joined Citibank. That launched what would turn out to be 27 years in banking, a few in Denver, transferred to St. Louis, and then eventually to Singapore. And I'll tell you, early on, one of the things that sort of transition taught me was learning from adversity. The first business that I went to, in fact, the first three businesses that I went to with that bank had huge blowups. It just so happened that I ended up on the Titanic everywhere that we went. And I remember having a very senior vice president early on in my career say, when somebody tells you that something is impossible, that's your opportunity to shine. And well, I'll tell you what, you learn more from adversity than you do from just having everything go smoothly, particularly in banking. So if I could be so bold as to give your listeners a bit of advice, embrace the bad times, because you come away from them stronger. You come away from them a heck of a lot smarter than people that have not experienced them. The mistake that I made during that time was getting too comfortable, spending too much time in a couple of jobs. I had one boss for almost 10 years at that time. That's too long. I should have been managing my career a little better, but at that time, it just wasn't it wasn't possible. I did learn an awful lot about networking through that time as well, the importance of it. In fact, one of the clients that I have today, we do a a training course for senior risk managers about 4 times a year, have for, oh gosh, they've been a client for 10 years now. And the one thing that resonates when we bring people together is their opportunity to network and how powerful that is. So, that's their philosophy, and it sort of juxtaposes with the way that I got a lot of jobs through my career. It was always through somebody else.
I agree. Networking is one of the most powerful ways to get your foot in the door and also to find out about other roles as well. Now, so from your early days, you transitioned into the corporate sector, into finance, which is quite a volatile environment to be in, especially because you moved from America to Singapore and you were an expatriate. And expatriate life sounds wonderful and glamorous, and it is in many ways. And this is where we first met, in Singapore as expats together, living a really fun life. But it was so volatile too, because during that time there was the Asian financial crisis, then of course, which followed with the global financial crisis, and jobs and job security, it goes up and down, and things do change. But when you moved as an American going to Singapore and then living and working in Asia, what did you find were the challenges of that country move, as well as a big cultural move too?
Well, the interesting thing is the job was one that was very similar to what I was doing, but on a larger scale and with a lot more countries. I had been working in the U.S. and Europe from the U.S., and I had gravitated to training with a specialty in management simulations. And the job offer that I got in Singapore actually was given to me on a flight from Sydney to Singapore. You probably didn't know that. But a senior guy that was senior risk manager that was in Singapore at the time asked me to come over and help run these training courses that the bank was running all over Asia Pacific. We had visited Singapore. We had friends there before, so I knew something about the country and the lifestyle. I always say it took my wife about 6 minutes to make the decision, let's go. It took my kids about 6 days, and it took us that long to figure out that, we could convince them that it was a good idea because we had American football and American baseball available at the school there, and they were athletes. So that made it okay with them. For me, it took more like 6 weeks to make the decision, quite frankly. I thought that it was going to be a 2 to 3 year deal. I was really concerned about what was going to happen after that. My kids were in 6th and 7th grade at the time. We move and then move them back in the beginning or middle of high school. What kind of job would there be available? I drew up all of the negative scenarios that I could to maybe turn this down. And one day I just finally looked in the mirror and I said, I would rather go and do this and fail than look back on it and say, I wish I would have tried that. And so it began. When I did what lots of expat guys did, I left. I brought the kids. It was time for school to start. I grabbed the kids and took them over to Singapore, and left my wife with a house to sell, 2 cars to sell, a house to divide into, what's coming over on a container and what's going to be staying in storage. And quite frankly, I think her job was harder than mine. I just went and started working. And, Singapore is pretty easy to get used to. You know that it's English speaking. And it just turned into an adventure. We treated it like the adventure that it was. And that feeling never really changed for 10 years. I love the place. It became our second home.
I know exactly the feeling, having spent a total of 18 years in Singapore, and I've made 5 country moves, and each one has been quite daunting. And it's easier for the main breadwinner who's moving over, and then you've got, the exciting new job, and then the family have to follow. And what do they do with themselves as well? Because there's always a trailing spouse, whether it's the wife or the husband, and there are children, especially if they're teenage children at the time. Then there's a lot of complaining that goes on because you've got to uproot them from their friends, and there's so much of an emotional turmoil. But going back to you and your career, so you started as an expat in Singapore with the same company. So that was a slightly easier transition for you.
Yeah.
You're moving to an English-speaking country. You enjoyed your role. At that time, you worked up to Director of Risk Management Training, which was very exciting. So you were traveling all over Asia Pacific, conducting training and getting more and more skills. But then something happened and you changed and you moved over to Standard Chartered from Citibank. What facilitated that change?
Like so many foreign company or companies that have expatriates, we're not cheap. It costs, especially in a place like Singapore. You have to bring something extra to the party. Otherwise, you're not going to stay very long. I had been 6 years there. We had created best-in-class training. I'll blow my horn a little bit, but we actually had the best of this variety of training in the world of Citibank. We were training 1,000 people a year, 25 at a time in 10 different countries with 90% approval ratings. I was pretty proud of that. But all things come to an end, and they decided to hand that off to someone local, and my time ended. I was going to be transferred back. What I was going to be transferred back to, and this happens a lot as well when you're gone for a while, is it was not the job that I wanted. It was a step down. It wasn't in a location that I wanted. And I asked for one more year at that point because my last son was going into his final year of high school, and I wanted him to finish out there before he went off to college. And the answer was no. And I had been talking to some friends at Stanchard who were former Citibankers, and they needed there what I was doing. So I decided to just make the switch, largely because, for the sake of my son. And also largely because we really liked Singapore. So we weren't ready to come back. So I ended up with a 2-year contract with Stanchard and then another 2-year contract. And by that point, the kids were nearing either out of or nearing the end of college. And when that contract ended, it was just time to get back home. So
yeah. Sometimes you just feel like, okay, I think I've done my time here now, and it's time to return. But tell us a little bit now. In your book, Never Do Anything Just Right, you do talk about these transitions.
The title of which should tell you something about me to start with.
I know. I looked at the title. I thought, what? Did you never do anything just right? But interesting times. But tell me, because in the book, you talk about some of the funniest stories of things that happened when traveling with airlines, with the golf. I mean, we met originally in Singapore because of golf, which was great fun. And golfing in Asia really is a wonderful experience. And we were part of a group of about, I think, 25 to 30 people who all rotated and got to know each other so well. And we'd go up from Singapore to Malaysia to play golf. And we became quite a tight group of people just having fun, getting to know each other, enjoying a sport together and sharing, different experiences. And we were playing with locals as well as expatriates as well. And it was a really, really fun time. So tell us one of your favorite stories of those days.
Oh, God. Oh, it had to be, when you talk about playing golf in Malaysia, people just kind of roll their eyes. If they haven't been through that kind of an experience, they don't get that you can just jump in your car, drive through two checkpoints, have money taken out of your cash card, and inside of 45 minutes be at a golf course in another country. That just doesn't register. So that in and of itself kind of gets people's attention. I always had the favorite stories for me from golfing over there were the alternate tolls, where if they saw a car with an S on the beginning of its license plate, well, that car was probably an expat and they probably had money. So so they'd have their cones set out and they'd pull you over. And the first time that it happened to me, I knew what the drill was because people had told me about it, but it hadn't happened to me yet. And it just so happened that my wife's sister and my niece were with. So I get pulled over. Guy comes, the gentleman walks up to my car, and you always kept local currency. You kept Malaysian ringgit in your glove compartment. And I knew that the going rate was 50 ringgit, which is about $12 US at the time. And you were going to have to bribe your way through. That was just the way it was. So he rolls down the window. He says, "You're going very fast." I said, "How fast?" He said, 125 over. It was nowhere close to what I was going. He had no radar. He had, in fact, his partner was standing in front of my car, as God is my witness, was writing down my license number on a very official looking napkin that I'm sure was going to be thrown away fairly quickly. So I said, "No receipt." He said, "No receipt." Cindy had already pulled out the money from the glove compartment. He didn't want to show him how much he had, just pull out the one bill. Well, the smallest we had was 100. So I gave him 100 ringgit, drove on. Well, my niece sitting in the back seat saying, oh my God, Uncle Rod just bribed a policeman. Oh my God. I said, "Allison, it's okay. I knew it was coming." She said, "Were you scared?" I said, "No, I had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen. I was a little hacked off because all I had was 100 and they don't make change." So she said, "Well, I was going to take a picture." And I said, "No, I don't think that would be a good idea. You might not see Uncle Rod for a little while if you took a picture."
Oh dear, we've all got so many funny stories of our times as expatriates, and then getting used to different ways of doing things as well. And I would highly recommend, if you want to hear more stories, war stories.
The thing that, and I was thinking about it when you were asking the question, the thing that was amazing to me about living in Singapore is how similar the lifestyle was to at home. That I didn't see coming. We met. Our kids were athletes. They were athletes over there. We met all of our social circle sitting in the stands and watching our kids play baseball and football. That's the people that we hung around with. They're the people that became lifelong friends. We played golf and made friends with you and lots of others, locals and expatriates alike. And that we would have done here. I make most of my friends are golfers. So from that standpoint, it was really not that dissimilar a lifestyle. It's kind of hard, it was refreshing to find that to be the case.
Yeah, I think a moral of the story would be, if you're given an opportunity to work overseas and you think, oh, is it going to be too different for me, is to embrace it, because it provides you with wonderful life experiences. You meet lots of different people that you wouldn't have the opportunity to meet otherwise. Now, back to Korea before we go into the book. Okay. So then you move back to the US after, a very successful time in Asia, and you transitioned into a number of different things. There was Sports Group International, where you were vice president, and that was focusing on sporting goods, which is completely different from the finance sector. Then you were the founder or a partner of this business called Be Right Back, which is all about lumber support, again, completely different, before you founded a training business called Level 4 Resumes, which then expanded into Level 4 International for executive development and training as well. So you became very entrepreneurial upon your return to the US. Tell us a little bit about that.
That was, part of it was necessity, because I didn't have a job. I kind of needed to eat. The SGI was a executive recruiting firm. So I became a recruiter. It was actually my brother-in-law who had started that company. He's now retired, but absolutely one of the best executive recruiters in the sporting goods business in the world, bar none. He's just excellent at what he did. And he offered to have me come in and take me under his wing. And, here's a family member that became my mentor and my teacher on a completely different career. I was just starting to get a little momentum, and what happens but the economic downturn. So it turned out to be the worst timed career change in the history of career changes, because I found out very quickly that people didn't need to pay you to help them not hire people. So,
and this is 2008, 2009.
2008 or 9.
Yeah.
So So I was really forced to do something different, and I was once again the beneficiary of really good timing. Somebody up there has always been there when I needed them at the right time, or when times were bad. I had a friend that I met in Singapore. He's a Brit that had repatriated to London, had joined Barclays. He called me up right around this time and said, "I need some training courses like the ones we had in Singapore." And he was one of my primary instructors in his area of expertise. And I said, "Well, I got time, so yeah, I'd like to do that." And I started. That's when I started Level 4 International. The resume side of it actually came a little bit later, but and largely because I saw so many bad resumes when I was a recruiter that I decided to start writing resumes for people, because people are not good at bragging about themselves. They're just awful at it. So I added that to the business. But mostly it's a training and executive development company with the same simulations that I used in Asia, because the guy that wrote them did them freelance, and he provided me with that intellectual property, and I started doing the same kind of training on my own that I'd been doing within the corporate walls for years, and I'm still doing it to this day to some extent. Very short list of clients now, but it's been a good gig.
Yeah. And so how did you feel about going off on your own? Did that feel quite daunting to set up your own business or set up your own
absolutely
consultancy? Yeah. What were the key challenges?
Mostly just the fear factor. I knew what needed to be done with this particular business, with LFI. And quite frankly, I probably wouldn't have stayed being a recruiter. I was good at it. I wasn't great at it. And it wasn't my passion. My passion is the thing that LFI is, that brought me right back into my comfort zone. So from that standpoint, I knew that I was doing the right thing. It was the right thing for me. The scary part is, just getting clients. The one thing that I was terrible at, and largely because I dislike it, is marketing myself. I really, really dislike that. Now, I had enough connections around the banking industry globally that I ended up with clients in Singapore and Malaysia, with this gentleman in London, in India, and all of that was based upon networking. Every single client that I had was someone that knew me or knew of me in my travels of doing the same kind of work in 20 plus countries around the world. So from that standpoint, it took off fairly easily, but I was always worried about the next thing. And then setting up the books. My darling wife is my financial controller. We are a company of two. I like it that way. And she is, I always say, she's my dyslexic controller who doesn't like numbers. So I'm destined to be in prison someday anyway. I really don't. I don't need to make a long-term plan.
Well, at least you've got a roof over your head. It'll be fine.
Well, yeah, so far. But but it was being drawn back to the passion that made a lot of that easier. And quite frankly, it was a relief, because I really didn't have an idea of what was going to be paying the bills now that that recruiting was going sideways. The people that I was working with in recruiting had enough, they had decades in the business, so they had networks. And here we are back to networking that could survive them. Well, I was just in the process of building my network, and it wasn't very large. So it certainly wasn't sustainable in times that were that bad. The network that I had, the really big network that I had, was the one that created Level 4 International.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And now Level 4 International providing executive development and training, and you're back into your wheelhouse again.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's been such an interesting journey that you've made in your career. And I think something that comes through to me is your resilience, your adaptability, your positive attitude and sense of humor, despite, the challenges. That's what really sees you through when there are changes in your life. aren't
Well, you
they?
can either laugh or cry about it. And my family has a tendency to laugh at some pretty awful things, quite frankly. It's what gets us through. I'll
Yeah.
give you an example.
Mm.
This is one of my favorites from the book. When we were in Singapore, my youngest son contracted juvenile type 1 diabetes. He's freshman in high school. He was a very sick little boy. And he ended up getting back onto the playing field, and things were going pretty well. But we were always sort of walking on eggshells around that disease. You know, he's giving himself shots. We never did give him one shot of insulin. He took it over from day one. But we're always sort of, you know, walking that line between hovering and you know, being good parents, but giving him space. So we're close to a year into this thing. Cindy ended up getting sick. Long story short, it turned out to be fine, but she had a major surgery that was cancer related. And she sat at the dinner table one night and said, well, you know, we're sure this is going to be fine, but you kids need to know that complications can happen in surgery. And, you know, I could have something serious happen. And my youngest son, my diabetic, says, Mom, if you die, we'll really miss you, but can I have your pancreas? and most people would have the initial reaction that you just had. We busted up. That just, it absolutely broke the ice around diabetes in our household. And we were fine from that point forward. That's all it took, is one good gut laugh over something that was said that was really inappropriate. But that's how we dealt with it. And it worked out just fine.
And you know what? The thing is that if you're able to look at any situation, good or bad, and think, okay, well, what's going to happen is going to happen. So how are we going to deal with it? And how do we find the good out of it? That's what you've got to do. And that's probably what has helped you to develop your resilience, to keep bouncing back all the time. And if you can't laugh at yourself and you can't laugh at a situation, then you're going to cry, aren't you?
Yeah. So, you know, that and a somewhat demented sense of humor. So,
you've got to have the sense of humor. Okay, this leads us very nicely to you and your memoirs, Mr. Jahner, Never Do Anything Just Right. So what prompted you to write this book?
You know, I didn't spend my life thinking someday I'm going to write a book. I really didn't. But things just sort of came together. The pandemic hit, and my back support business and LFI itself got very slow. You know, the training was all on site. We ended up doing some remote training, but the kind of training that I do is much, much better in person. So I had time again. They're just, you know, the businesses were both virtually non-existent pandemic related. A couple of things got me thinking. One, we at this point had a grandson who is today 5, and he was very young at the time. Interesting stories about that whole development in the book as well. That is something I don't want to go through again, but came out on the right side. My daughter-in-law asked us when my grandson was born, if we would write him a letter every year on his birthday. And she's going to keep those until, you know, when he reaches the age of appreciation. And we now have a granddaughter that we're doing the same thing for. So she's going to hand him, you know, 18, 20 years worth of letters from crazy grandpa and Grammy. And he'll see what we saw through our eyes back as he's growing up year by year. And I thought that was genius. It got me thinking about something that my mom had said many, many years ago. They were Germans from Russia, and the Bolsheviks were taking over in the early 1900s. They basically ran from the Bolsheviks, homesteaded in North Dakota, upper Midwest, you know, along the Canadian border in the U.S. To get away from that fray. And you want to talk about about career crossroads and transitions that are difficult. Pick up everything, leave everything that you have behind in Russia, and move your family halfway around the world, and build a sod hut, and start farming land that in order to eat. And my grandmother smuggled out a candy dish. That's the only hard good that they took. They took the clothes on their back. They had $500 in their pocket, and they were a fairly wealthy family that left everything behind and started over again. Mom wrote a paper about that when she was in high school, and her one regret about that whole transition that her father and mother had made was lost. She didn't keep the paper, and most of the memories faded over time. And I thought, between those two things, between now writing these annual letters and Mom's regret about not having that paper, I decided that I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to leave something behind for my grandkids that gave them a little bit of insight into me. And I would love to have something like that for my grandparents. There was a really big generation gap in my family, so I never knew my grandparents. So it's something that I just decided to do for that reason. And the book was really it's more for family than anything. And then it just the idea started growing, and the material started getting a little bit more universally maybe interesting. And so I ended up publishing. But the initial thought was, I'm just going to write this for the kids.
And when you sent me the advanced readers edition to go through, and I started reading it, I see this is absolutely fascinating, because it's an insight into someone's life. It's really quite personal. And it ends up becoming this wild ride where, you kind of laugh, you kind of cry, and you think, this is real. This is someone's life, and everyone has got a story to tell. Yeah. And how we live our lives. I mean, all of us, we approach, challenges and opportunities so differently, but you and your family have embraced all of these incredible changes, and you've really seen the humor and the positive out of everything. And I really loved reading this book. And so for you, what did you learn personally from writing your memoirs and writing this book?
It really turned into a labor of love. I mean, I started out writing, I said to myself, I'm going to write 15 minutes a day. That's how I'm going to get this thing done. I'm going to have it. If I don't have a discipline of doing something with it every day, then I'm just not going to get it done. I'm not the type, and this is all sort of vignettes. It's very eclectic, and it's not the sort of thing that you can just sit down and write in, across a weekend of, never going to sleep. For me, it was something that I just needed to do over a period of time. I found it very therapeutic. I found it rewarding to finish it. I found it therapeutic once I finished it up. Once I saw it in print, and when it was all done. I'll tell you that the two things that pre-readers have said to me that are most rewarding about the whole thing is people that know me say that it's like I'm talking to them, that I write like I talk. And I was really hoping for that. You never know if that's going to be the case. The people that don't know me, and this one surprised me, found commonalities. And it's a short list of folks that I had read it that know nothing about my life. And they found commonalities in growing up in a completely different state or different circumstance, or maybe they were an expat, or maybe they weren't, or they knew somebody that was. So that part was, that was really rewarding. So at that point, my editor said, I think you've got something that might have appeal to more than just your family.
Yeah. And what I found so interesting is that whether it's, someone who's growing up in North Dakota, or someone who's, worked in Asia, or someone who's had various transitions, or someone who's gone through, crises such as the global financial crises or whatever it might be, when you're reading the book, you think, oh yeah, I've experienced something like that, and especially your stories about what it's like to travel and airlines and everything that happens with international travel and business travel and landing in a different country and all of those things. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. So you hit the nail on the head with that. I think let's not tell people too much about the book because they've got to buy it and read it. Okay,
Absolutely.
never do anything that's right.
It's going to be $16 that it's $16 that they'll never get back. So.
They'll never get back, and it's certainly a very wild ride. So, there are challenges though writing a book and publishing a book. So, what would your top advice be for any budding authors, people who think, I've got a book in me? And I firmly believe that everyone's got a book in them, but too often it just stays in there and it doesn't get thrown out to the world to experience, because it's it's an emotional process that you go through when you're writing a book as well, whether it's personal memoirs or, for me, mine is a self-help book, but it takes so much time and energy. So for someone who wants to write a book, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, what would your advice be?
Well, we started this conversation with what makes you tick. And that makes me think, you have to write what you know. It's in you. If it's fiction, then I hope you have a good enough imagination to write that. If it's nonfiction, then it absolutely has to be what you know. The thing that I know the best is what I've done, and I remembered a few things along the way that were a little bit funny, and a couple of them that were poignant, and hopefully people resonate with that. So just finding your lane and what you want to write about, I think is point one. Point two is just the discipline. I've known people that have more than one book floating around in their head, and the hardest thing is just getting started. I think once you get started and you have some sort of discipline around how you're going to do this, some kind of a plan. For me, it was 15 minutes a day. Well, 15 became 30 and 45 and 2 hours some days. And other days it was 15. I wasn't into it, but I had it on my calendar. I put every day on my calendar, write 15 minutes today. And I turned that salmon colored to do into a green, that I did it. Okay, I accomplished that. Now I'll move on with my day. So what and the discipline around making it happen, I guess, is the two things that come straight to mind for me.
And also what I like is that you got so much feedback as well from people to be sure that this is a book that people will definitely want to read. And I can vouch that it certainly is a very interesting read. I had a lot of fun reading it. And yes, I do know Rod, but I only know Rod from the Singapore days. I don't know all the other stuff around it. And so I learned a lot, and it was it was just so interesting. So I can highly recommend this book. And what is next for you, Rod?
Getting over the nerves of putting myself out there like this. I very seriously considered putting it under a nom de plume, just in case it doesn't go well for whatever reason, but I elected not to do that. Next, well, I'm kind of hooked on the idea now. So when I had a professional writer looking at the book. She'd had it for a while. My editor is a gentleman that I actually met. That's an interesting story in and of itself, but I'll answer this question first. My editor found this professional reader. I called him up. I said, well, it's been a while. She's had it. What are you, what does she think about it? And he said, well, I just talked to her and she's doing a number of books. And she said, she put down one of the books that she's reading so that she could go back and finish reading yours. So I took that to mean that at least one person on the planet thinks that my book is better than one other book on the planet. So the working title of my sequel is Better Than One.
I like that. Better than one.
The subtitle is Because I Rememoired Some Other Stuff.
Okay, well, now you've put this out to the world. Of course, it will have to happen, won't it? So not only must we read Never Do Anything Just Right by Rod Jahner, after you've done that, there should be Better Than One coming up as well. So, Rod, this has been such a pleasure to talk to you today. It's been really interesting to talk about, all your career transitions as well, and what inspired you to write the book, and, that emotional journey from your early days through to now, from being a corporate man to an entrepreneur and now a published author. It's quite exciting, isn't it? So well done you.
There are three things that I never really anticipated being put by my name when I was a kid.
I look forward to it now becoming a #1 Amazon seller, and we'll have to have you back when Better Than One is published as well, because it'll be very interesting to read the sequel to Never Do Anything Just Right. So, any final words you want to leave with us?
Oh, I like the way you think with that Amazon selling thing. So my initial goal was to sell tens of copies. I think I've sold 20, so I've met my very small goal already.
Well, that's one tick, isn't it? That's another green for you. Let's set another goal, because that's what keeps us going in life, isn't it? To
Absolutely
dream another dream, set another goal. That's C.S. Lewis, isn't it? So I hope that you everyone who's been listening has enjoyed getting to know Rod Jahner a little bit. I can vouch for you that he is a man full of many, many stories, and having dinner with Rod and his lovely wife, Cindy, is a joy and a laugh a minute. So take care, and we will talk to you again soon. Thank you so much, Rod. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Your Career Podcast. Remember, my very special offer for you, my Career Success Program, is packed with over $3,000 worth of career support, and you can try it out for 3 days for only $25. Don't miss this amazing offer while it lasts. Go to janejacksoncoach.com/academy and check it out.